所以博士您来看哦，到了2022年，包含科学界目前研究的进度，我们可以怎么样展望2022年？这个病毒真的就是完全不会造成威胁了吗？
I think we'll see continuing progress on drug development. You know, we have now 3 small molecule drugs. We have antibodies from at least 3 companies already approved, authorized for emergency use, and multiple vaccines. And I think we need to move to next generation drug and vaccine development. And that's already in the works. And so the situation will only improve. And we just need to buy time for science to take its course.
是，所以博士不断的提到了 next generation，就是在下一个世代、次世代的疫苗的研发，现在科学界正在进行的。那也有另外一个说法，就是以我们现在目前有的疫苗，我们来打第3剂的加强针。其实，在美国现在就是打第3剂的加强针，但这2个好像是变成不同的策略哦。一个就是现有的疫苗，我们再多打加强针，或每年都打几剂；那另外一个就是我们再开发更好的次世代的疫苗。不是您可以带我们稍微了解一下，这2个策略跟这2个不同的方法，到底有没有哪一个比较好，或者是科学界现在比较着重在哪个方面？那对未来我们面对这个病毒的时候，是不是会让我们有一个可能有不一样的一个状况又会出现？
I think based on the studies that the scientific community has performed, it's pretty clear we have to do both. We have to make sure we apply the current vaccines the best we can. And that is, we already know that there is waning of antibody responses following even the best vaccines. After 6 months, the antibody levels, particularly the neutralizing antibodies, 综合抗体, are rather low. And that is associated with a decrease in vaccine protection. And when you boost, the antibody levels are restored and vaccine efficacy increases once again. And so it really argues for booster shots for a lot of people, particularly those who are elderly and at high risk. And also, if the Taiwan population has received largely AstraZeneca and 高端 vaccines, then and should the mRNA vaccines from Pfizer and Moderna become available, they should be used to boost. I think it's pretty clear that one will get a very robust antibody response. And that would increase the level of protection. I think unless Taiwan vaccinate widely with good vaccine, it's very difficult to reopen.
所以博士在你的意见来说，因为在台湾有一个说法是第3剂的加强针，主要是针对高风险，或您刚才也特别提到是年龄比较大的这些民众。不过就您的专业的看法，会觉得说，其实第3剂不只是针对他们，对于每一个民众来说，其实都还是有它的必要性吗？
Yes, based on our studies, I think the decline in antibody and decline in protection occurs in everybody. Of course, those who are younger and healthier could be infected, but they don't go to the hospital or die at the high rate. So the priority certainly should be given to the seniors and to people with underlying conditions. But in the long run, I think if we're going to control this, the booster shot should be more widely administered. Of course, that is if the supply is there, but I know the supply is increasing very, very rapidly. And there should be enough good vaccines for the whole world throughout next year.
For the whole world, for the next year. 这真的是一个非常好的目标，在明年大家可以来期待的。那在台湾，我们除了讨论第3剂之外，现在大家讨论非常多的就是混打。我们都知道，博士您过去在研究这个 AS 病毒的时候，讲这个鸡尾酒疗法，其实它就是混合性的。那这一次呢，针对 COVID-19 这样的病毒，您怎么样来看混打？在台湾这上面的讨论也很多，好像很多的研究数据也证实说，确实混打的保护力又更好一些。那再者，为什么混打 打都是 AZ 要打第一剂，mRNA 要做第二剂呢？它的道理是什么？
I think mixing and matching is already accepted in the US and it's authorized by the FDA. So a lot of mixing and matching of vaccines is already taking place. I know that Taiwan hasn't gotten there yet, but in terms of Taiwan's population receiving a lot of AZ vaccine, I've said earlier, its antibody responses are poor compared to the mRNA vaccines. So I would urge those, particularly those in the high-risk group or in the elderly population, to get boosted with one of the mRNA vaccines. I know Taiwan has received Moderna vaccine and Pfizer vaccine has been purchased through private entities. And so that's going to be available. Our immune system doesn't really care how you deliver the product to the immune cells, right? So the mRNA or the J&J AstraZeneca vaccine, they're just different delivery vehicles, but the product that is shown to the immune system is essentially the same. So there's really no huge problem with mixing and matching at all. And all the experimental data support that.
那我们一般都理解是 AZ 要先做第一剂的施打，然后再打 mRNA 做第二剂的施打是最好的保护效果吗？会造成像这样的结果，主要的原因是什么呢？
The AZ shot by itself does not induce a very good response, even when you give the booster. We have studied a lot of such cases, and they are clearly not as good as the Moderna Pfizer. So if somebody got an AZ, we would ask them to get a Moderna or Pfizer shot, and maybe even two. We have no experience with the 高端 vaccine, of course, here in the US. But even those who received Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which I guess is not used much in Taiwan, we would advise many of them to get the mRNA boost as well.
所以，就博士，你目前在研究室看到出来的数据就还是以 mRNA 的保护力看起来是最强的。所以 ，even 你打了 AZ， 即使打了2剂，还是会建议可以的话，在补打这个第3剂加强的时候，是选择 mRNA 这样子的不同的疫苗哦。那一方面，我们现在比较多的讨论是在疫苗部分呢，主要是帮助我们预防重症或是预防这个死亡率。那另外一个讨论点会变成说，如果我们真的已经是确诊的状况，我们怎么样有药物来做治疗？这方面的研究，现在国际上已经有一些药厂是已经有研究开发出来的新药。不过我们知道，其实去年博士您的团队也有开发出、研究出这个有9个抗新冠病毒抗体，也授权给台湾的一家中裕公司要来做合作。但后续可能是他们在计算开发的时间要经过了很多的过程那还有投入的一些资本，最后认为可能放在商业机转上面会没有商机。好像这个计划现在是已经停止了，所以也想要了解一下，在新药开发过程当中，其实一般会碰到最大的困难跟挑战是什么？那目前这个部分的研发进度又到了什么样的一个阶段呢？
Yes, I mentioned earlier that working on monoclonal antibodies against COVID is our major area of research. And we developed a bunch of them in early 2020, and we developed additional ones this year. One of the earlier ones was licensed from Colombia to Zhongyu, and they put it into development. However, from many perspectives, Zhongyu was a latecomer compared to U.S. companies. And so there's a pretty tough competition from companies such as Lilly, Regeneron, and GlaxoSmithKline in the US. But I think the biggest concern for Zhongyu was how to do the development in a competitive way, because more and more the good treatments are available. So can you actually do a study comparing your antibody with placebo? Because asking people to take placebo when there are already proven drugs and antibodies available is an ethical challenge. In addition, if you don't have placebo, then you have to compare your drug with a proven drug. And that automatically says it's going to be hard and it's going to require a lot more patience. It's going to require a longer timeline and increased costs. And in the midst of a shrinking market, because vaccines are now being rolled out in such huge numbers. And then we don't know what variants, new variants will emerge to confound the situation. So it's a business decision. So Zhongyi then relinquished the program and invested in another company called RenBio. It's a biotech in the US. And that product is now made under good manufacturing practices and is entering phase 1 clinical trial next year. But also that company is now going to focus on the niche market. That is, could that antibody be delivered in a new way that will stay in the system, say for a year? And that will protect people who do not respond to vaccines. There are maybe a few percent of the population that do not respond to vaccines. They're largely patients with other conditions on chemotherapy or other immunosuppression drugs. And so they don't respond to vaccines. And an antibody like that could protect such individuals. You may have heard a couple of weeks ago, the former US Secretary of State, Colin Powell, died from COVID. And he did not respond to vaccine because he has cancer and was on treatment. So there's a niche market for that. But I think in terms of what we're doing now is we're seeing if we could develop antibody and vaccines that would cover all of these viruses, COVID, SARS-1, and the animal viruses that exists in the wild and may someday come to infect us. We have to assume that coronaviruses will come again. We already seen 3 such outbreaks in 20 years. Surely more will come. And we have to have vaccines that act broader on this family of viruses.
所以这就是所谓的次世代疫苗 （Next Generation Vaccine），right?
Right.
OK，